You're listening to Under the Shell Podcast, the best in America.
Welcome to Under the Shell, presented by Testudo Times. I'm Brendan YSL.
I'm James.
And Michael House. And this week we have on former men's basketball, I think you can say legend at the University of Maryland. Also his second time on the show. He was our fourth guest we ever had on this program, James Gist. So let's get right to the interview. Just wrapped up, very long professional career overseas. Just kind of, was that a difficult decision to hang up the sneakers and say this is it? How'd you kind of come to that decision?
What's crazy is that to walk away from it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be, only because the motivation and the reason that I did it, it wasn't there anymore. And I always told myself, I never played the game of basketball for money. I knew that, when you did do something really well, that stuff comes with it. But I really only played because I wanted to win. And I wanted to win at the highest level, and I wanted to contribute to that on the teams that I played with. In the last couple of years, the teams that I was playing for, they were great organizations, but the aspirations, wasn't that championship mentality that I was used to. And to go overseas, or not necessarily overseas, but to go somewhere and just to play, for fun, just because it didn't sit well with me as a player. And I felt like, once I got to that point that, I would step away from the game, and I had more patience to teach the game. I have more patience to teach it. And so right now I've just been trying to transition into coaching, doing my best with that. But yeah, it wasn't so hard walking away from the game playing wise, because I just, I'd done everything. I won. I traveled the world. I played some of the biggest organizations, the biggest fan bases. And so, now I just kind of want to teach the stuff that I learned along the way.
When you were kind of going through that decision, how much were you able to follow, during that time, Maryland's run to the tournament? Were you able to watch, everything that happened with Kevin Willard? What was kind of the process there when you're overseas to be able to still tune into the Terps?
Yeah. I tried my best to keep up with the Terps, since I've left. It's been kind of difficult to watch college basketball now that I played professional for so long, only because it's just the pace of the game is so much faster. There's a lot of stuff. The shot clock is longer. Some of the stuff is just it's hard to watch. But this past year, I actually was home, and I was able to attend a lot of the Terps games. I was doing some post-game commentary with Terp Talk and Wayne Viner and those guys. And being at some of the games, being able to see, the Maryland team that we had this past season was pretty cool. The season started off kind of slow, with the support not being there as much. But as the season picked up, it just more fans and more fire started coming out of Xfinity Center. And like you said, to the run that they had this year in the tournament, it was a good ride, man. It was good to just be a part of and witness. Really exciting, especially being a Terps fan.
And now that you're back home, kind of a two-parter. First, when did you first kind of discover that you want to do coaching once your playing career ended? Was that something that you kind of always had on your mind that you knew you'd try to get into? And then now at home, kind of what are you doing with coaching? Have you gotten involved with any local high schools, colleges in the area, any local clinics or training centers?
So coaching has kind of been an aspiration of mine for at least the last 5-6 years. 5-6 years of me playing, I knew that once I was done, because I had the opportunity to be coached by coaches like Gary Williams, Greg Popovich with San Antonio, Rick Pitino, when I was in Panathinaikos, he's a legendary coach too, for all the people, the fan base in America that know those names. I was coached by a lot of other coaches too overseas that, are really, really smart and really gifted in what they do. And just being able to be on that side and be coached by them and understand, the value and what things you have to do to win, what goes into winning as an organization, that rubbed off on me. And I just want to be able to keep that going, as a coach, once I was done playing. Since I've been done, I've been here back home working out, training kids actually at this gym in Rockville called ProFit. It's been kind of fun, just getting my face back out there in the community, getting to teach the young kids, the younger generation, this next grassroots generation, let's say, the game of basketball, and through my expertise and through my lens, and that's just been fun. The winter season, I picked up AAU team through the gym that I was working at, so I was able to coach some eighth graders, and that was a fun experience. That was a fun experience. First time doing it, I was able to take a team that probably wasn't that good. I had some players on there that hadn't played 5-on-5 at all before, and so giving them an opportunity, teaching them, showing them what it's like to play with other players on the court. How it is to score and play defense. We managed to get a couple wins this season, and so that was really encouraging to me because I realized that what I was doing worked and that it could impact many levels, when it comes to the game of basketball. So it's just something fun to be around, but I really want to get into the bigger things. I want to get into college basketball. I want to try to get into the NBA as far as coaching. As a player, I was at the highest level, and now as a coach, I want to try to win at the highest level. That's just a goal of mine. It's an aspiration of mine, and I'm working towards that.
And it sounds like a couple other former players who played under Coach Williams, they're trying to throw their name into the ring for Buzz Williams' new staff now in College Park. Are you trying to get involved at all with this new staff coming along?
Oh, most definitely, man. The last couple of years I've been tapping it with Maryland, trying to set some feelers out there and seeing how I can, transition. What would be the best way? And this is a little bit prior to me actually retiring from playing basketball, because I know once I retired that it was going to be a time period where I got to figure out what I want to do next. But in my mind, I already knew what I wanted to do next. I know I wanted to coach. But now it's like, how do you go about doing that? Who do you got to talk to? How do you get your foot in the door? What are the things you got to do to build a resume in order to be considered? So that's kind of what I've been doing, networking the last couple of years. And, this year, unexpectedly, we didn't expect Willard to lead the program the way he did. But, with that happening, to open a new door for Coach Buzz to come in. And, Maryland has done a good job of setting the red carpet up for him to transition from A&M to try to bring, that tradition here, that winning tradition. But it is my aspiration. It is my goal to try to get on staff, man. I got a chance to meet with Buzz at the press conference about a week ago, just to introduce myself formally and things like that. But in that nature, I understand it's a process. There are people that are ahead of the game, and so I understand how it goes. But it is, a goal of mine to try to get on the bench. If it's not at Maryland, then hopefully somewhere. I just feel like I could be a benefit to any program. Once I get my foot in the door.
You mentioned your aspirations for coaching have kind of, come up in the past 5 or 6 years. Obviously, you were playing basketball the past 5 or 6 years. Did you feel like later in your career you felt more like a coach on the floor, even a coach on the bench when you're playing overseas in the past 5, 6 years?
Most definitely. I was always a leader in the locker room. I was always a leader, a presence on the floor. And I spent a lot of time on the court, for a long period of time. North of like 10 years, I probably was on the court 36 minutes out of a 40-minute game overseas. For offensive reasons, for defensive reasons, just for everything. But the impact that I had as a player, a lot of people, they kind of listened to me, I guess. They listened to me, but I also had a good grasp of the game. Coaches could tell me something one time, I could pick it up and go with it. You didn't have to give me a whole, rundown of what exactly you want me to do. And it even got to the point to where in practice, because the coaches that I had played for, they knew I wanted to be a coach. They knew the way I talked about basketball to them, or during the game, I might see something. I'm like, Coach, let's run the play like this with a different type of action. Does it? Works. And so they know how my mind works. And so at the end of practices, sometimes coach would be like Patino one time. He was like, man, you'll take your 5. I got my 5. We're going to run, 1 or 2 plays. You set up the defense. I got the offense. We'll see if it works. I've had a couple coaches do that because for one, it's fun, but two, it's like you get a chance to see, like, in the moment, how are you going to react? What are you going to guard, And so some of the coaches that we've had moments like that within practice to give me that opportunity just to see what I would do strategically. But just from a standpoint of knowing the game and just being able to give knowledge of the game, that's just always something that, has been a part of me. Coach Gary Williams actually taught me to be a student of the game when I went to Maryland. I think that's kind of where it started. It's how to watch tape. A lot of people don't know how to watch video. They watch for the highlight reels, or they watch for, the main pictures, as opposed to watching how did that build up? Where did the momentum come from? Where did the switch happen? Why did why was this player so open? It wasn't just because of the bounce pass that happened. It might have happened 3 things before that. But, to understand that, it takes, time. It takes, the willingness to learn the game. And Coach Williams, he taught me that. And so that's just something that I've kept my whole career. It's something that I'm hoping that I can give back to this next generation of players.
I wanted to ask you, when you're talking about, Mike mentioned the former players, when a coaching search happens, like when Maryland hired Buzz Williams, or when, Kevin Willard was kind of on the way out, do you have like a group chat of like former guys or like alumni guys on your team that you were texting, or former teammates, and being like, hey, like, did you see the news? Like, can you remember your reactions to some of the events that have kind of happened over the past couple of weeks?
Man, it really happened kind of fast. I wouldn't say I have a group chat with the former players and stuff like this, but you do have a network of people that you talk to, who's all kind of paying close attention. One, because you're fans, but two, because you have a vested interest in what goes on with the University of Maryland, especially with the basketball program. Um, and so when it came out that Willard was, wasn't sure, like he was on the fence, and this is during the tournament. I mean, it's like second round or top 16, I believe, when the news came out, and then you had the AD, Damon Evans leaving as well. So it kind of like stirred the pot a little bit while the season was still going, and so that kind of brought up a lot of attention to like what's going to happen with Maryland. Um, and then him leaving, and then the matter of 48 hours, 72 hours, I think it was, they were able to find a new head coach for that position. Um, you can talk about it with friends, you can talk about it with people that you network, but you can't really plan for situations like that, especially because it's not in your control. You kind of just got to sit back and see what happens and how it plays out. You just try to put yourself in position to be able to contribute, I guess. That's the way I look at it.
Do you think that, just for a former player, can you explain to us, like, for the guys in Maryland's locker room, right, that kind of have an idea, or all this stuff is happening, before you're about to play a huge game in the Sweet 16, like, it's easy for them to tell the media, hey, like, that doesn't affect us, and we don't know, truthfully, but if you were a player in that situation, how do you think that affected the locker room, kind of Willard's, the drama that had happened throughout the week and leading up to the game? Do you think it happened at all, or affected it at all? And what would have the tenor of the locker room been?
9 times out of 10, um, the people in the locker room are aware of what's going on well before the media gets a hold of it, and well before the rest of the world gets a hold of it. So I don't know or think that the news coming out the way it did probably had a serious major impact on the team in the locker room in that moment. Your mind is just focused on playing. Your mind is focused on what y'all have built the whole season. And throughout the season, you're going to get stuff like that happens. Media, that's just what media does. You can't really pay attention to that. It's a distraction. As a player, you can't focus on the outside noise. You can only focus on what's in front of you. And I'm pretty sure that Coach Willard and the rest of the coaching staff did a really good job of trying to keep the team protected from the negativity or the, let's say, distractions from it. But I mean, in this line of business, that's just what it is. And now it's become more prevalent, with social media and the way that things are going. You have more access to people. You have more access to the life and the decisions that goes on into it. And now it's capable of hitting the internet very fast, as opposed to having to wait for the next day to catch a highlight or wait for the weekend newspaper to come out to really read up on what happened this week in sports. Now it's boom, right then and there. So, I mean, that's a factor that you have to deal with. You have to understand that when you're under the microscope, everything you do is going to be scrutinized. Everything you do is going to be talked about. And with that said, you still have to keep a level mindset so you can go out there and compete. So what happens in the world doesn't matter. Nobody cares. You still have to go out there and play. And I think that that's the message that has to be pushed regardless of what hits the media, when it hits the media, and how players should react.
I guess just then the follow-up there is, what did you think of the Buzz Williams hire? Kind of, can you give your perspective on him as a coach and what he could bring to Maryland?
I mean, he's well decorated. First and foremost, he has the resume, he's proven, and all the programs that he's been to, he's taken them from one level and taking it to a higher level. Every program that he's been a part of. So with that being said, he has a philosophy, and he has a way that he runs things, and it works. It's proven. With that being said, a school like Maryland has to be able to move in a direction where, we're a top school. We're a top school. We're a competitive school, traditional wise. We've always been in the run for, let's say, postseason, accolades. So it only makes sense to bring in a coach that's decorated like Buzz. And he's done a great job throughout his career. And I'm sure that he's going to do a good job here at Maryland. I don't think Maryland made a wrong decision in what they did and who they selected. The very diligent process that they had to replace an AD in the meantime. They still got to replace a roster in the meantime. Like, it's a lot that has to happen in the next 2-3 weeks, and it's a lot of pressure on him to be able to do it as well. But I think that Maryland made the right decision in selecting that person, and they have everything around him that he will need in order to build a team to compete this year.
You had a former player, Lionel Moore, come out and say that he wanted somebody in the family to be hired, kind of, either a Maryland alum or somebody with ties to the area. Buzz Williams obviously doesn't have either of those. What are your thoughts on that? Would you have wanted somebody who maybe was closer tied to the university, and why do you think Elmore came out and said that?
I mean, it's just, for so long, I think that, I don't want to say for so long, it feels like a long time, but, since Gary left, it's like we kind of moved away from bringing the alumni back in, I guess. I've been gone for 16 years, like you said, so I haven't been so close to the program to see how it moves and everything. I'm just now coming back into the picture. The time that I have been home to see the games and everything, it has been a different vibe. I will say, just from a fan standpoint, with the students, filling out the section. I'm just used to Xfinity Center having like 17,000 every game. But again, when I played, we were in the ACC. Now we're in the Big Ten, so I don't know where the shift came. I don't know if it was because of coaching. I don't know if it was because of alumni not being as involved with the program. I don't know if it's because we're just not in the ACC anymore. But the thing that did change was that, there were no more alumni on the bench, I guess. With Gary, you had everybody who was there, with Jimmy Patsos, you had Keith Booth, you had Dave Dickerson, you had Chuck Drizel, Lefty's son, who served time on the staff. You had a lot of guys that came through, that were ex-Maryland players. And even when you look back at the championship teams, the ones that went to the back-to-back Final Fours and won, if you look at the pictures on their bench, or even at the ACC tournament, you look at the pictures on their bench, that bench is just full of alumni, full of people that understand, what Maryland was about and the tradition that Maryland upheld. And I guess that's just probably what Lenny Elmore was kind of getting at. So as a ex-player, I understand it. But at the same time, times are changing. In this area, what ex-player as a coach do you have that has a resume like Buzz, to be honest? You have people that can actually help out with the program. Dwayne Simpkins is doing an amazing job at American. I know he was a candidate before Buzz got the job. But does he have the resume that Buzz does? And that's no shame to him. Juan Dixon did a great job, with what he's done since he retired as a coach. He has a mind for it. But does he have a resume of what Buzz does? It's like you're putting a university in somebody's hands that has gone through it and won and actually made it to the NCAA tournament, made it to the promised land where we're trying to get to. That's what it's all about. So when you look at that and you're putting somebody in the driver's seat, what in this area do we really have? Now, you have people that could probably help and assist, but to put somebody in the driver's seat, I think we got to get to that point. But again, I don't think it was a bad hire bringing in Buzz. I do hope and feel that in some way we can kind of bring that alumni base back into Maryland, because you have so much talent around here, from coaches to players. So much. This DMV area is full of it, and everybody wants to be a part of Maryland, in some way, shape, or form. Maryland State School, the fan base, it's beyond me how many people really support Maryland, And so you see it as the team gets better and as the team gets good, you see all these people come out. They're wearing their Maryland gear, wearing their jerseys, they're supporting, the team. So you have a lot of people here that take it serious.
You bring up a good point there about, what coaches in the area have a better resume than Buzz. You also bring up a good point with the fans. That was a big topic of contention earlier this season about fan attendance in Xfinity, whether it's been lacking this year compared to previous seasons. I wanted to shift gears a little bit, talk about your former coach. You mentioned him earlier, Rick Pitino. He was in the NCAA tournament this year, 2 seed. Obviously, very exciting season for the Johnnies. Do you have a favorite story playing under him in Greece? What was it like playing under Rick?
Rick is one of those guys, man. He's got stories for days. Like, literally, he has stories for days. He will never tell the same one over and over for a whole season, because he's just that experienced. From his days coaching in college, to his days coaching in the NBA, coaching against Magic Johnson and Bird. It's he has so much experience. You just kind of want to be around it. And so when he's talking to you, you can't help but listen. And then when you actually try out what he's telling you to do, you see that it works. And it shows why he is, one of the best to do is to coach. When Rick came to Greece, The team I was on, we were actually well coached. We had a well put together team, but we were just playing like shit. Excuse my language. We weren't playing good, and our record wasn't good. And the type of team that we're usually in the top echelon of Europe. And that year, we were just doing bad. We were like in 15th place, 13th, 14th place, out of playoff contention. They ended up firing our coach, who was a really good coach, but they ended up firing him, and they brought in Coach Patino. And we probably had about 12, 10 games left on the season. And like I said, we were in 15th place. Well, Coach Patino was able to motivate us, tell us some things that we probably needed to hear as basketball players. Um, but he changed our season around, man. We ended up running down the last, I think, 9 games. We won 8 of those. 5 of those were on the road, and like 3 of those games were top 2, 3 teams in the EuroLeague at the time, and we were able to do that and run it down and make the playoffs. And so it showed me that as long as you have somebody that can deliver a message, get it across, and get you to believe and understand that it works. That's really what it is. You hear about coaches losing their locker room all the time. You hear about coaches, their players just want to play for them, because these coaches, it's the messages that they deliver. They deliver that message, and you understand it as a player, and it makes you want to go out there and try. And Rick just gave us some things that, as players, real players, you got to look in the mirror. You got to say, like, nah, I know I can do this. I'm one of the best at doing this. When you can put that stuff together, put everything else aside, and put the team first, man, amazing things can happen. And Rick turned our season around in a matter of months. In a matter of 2, 3 months, he turned our season around and just showed, like, what he could do. Imagine if he had a whole season. Imagine if he had a team with his budget that he could actually run, like, how he thinks. He's amazing. He's amazing what he does, and I was fortunate to be able to be coached by him.
What quality of yours specifically, if you had to narrow it down to one or two, do you think will make you a successful coach?
Well, part of it is what I kind of just talked about, my ability to relate. My ability to relate and talk to my players, that's what it would be. Um, I've been fortunate enough to travel the world for 16 years as a professional, um, learning all kinds of different cultures and languages and having to adjust on the fly. And playing in Greece, I was on a team for 7 years, and I had 8 coaches. All coaches, all of them were prominent, but I was one of the players that stuck the entire time. I wasn't on the rosters that got guys cut and traded out of there. I stayed. The coaches were fired, and I stayed. So my ability to be able to adjust is one of those things that are, I think, huge qualities for a coach to have. Because if you can send a message, you can tell your players something, but if you can't relate to them and they don't have a reason to want to listen to you, they're just going to do what they want to do. You know. Um, and I have the ability to be able to talk to people and just get them to understand and believe that what we're doing is something that's going to help everybody. Everybody's going to benefit from it. Now, you do run into times where you run into roadblocks, you run into hiccups, and I've been in part of those situations where we've had to fix teams from the inside out during the season. I've been in those situations. I'm able to make decisions on the fly. I'm very strategic and cerebral when it comes to the basketball game. So all of those things I think are very great qualities when it comes into coaching. And it's just something that I really believe in. It's something that I know works. I've been running camps and clinics. I've been, played with all kind of players, played under all kind of coaches. And these are things that have gave me longevity in this game. So I don't see why it wouldn't translate from the other side of teaching it. I have the patience. That's one thing you have to have is patience. As a player, I probably say I wouldn't have the patience because, you're in the trenches, you're playing the game. You have to be on your game right now. We don't have time to wait till after the game to go to the video and see why we lost. I don't want to lose. And if I'm losing because you're not on your job or you missed an assignment or whatever, we got to talk this out. But as a coach, I can recognize that, okay, they missed it. They're not there yet. We need more time. We got to work on this. We got to work on this. We got to improve this. They got to learn this. I have the patience to do that as a coach. As a player, not so much. And that was another reason why I stepped away from the game.
I got one last question. This is a little off topic, but a big topic in basketball culture right now is the way that mainstream media has been covering basketball, specifically the NBA, with shows like First Take. Most recently, you see Stephen A. Smith got into a little bit of a beef with LeBron James. As a former player, I know you spent a lot of time overseas, but as a former player and you're looking at the way that the media now covers basketball, just how do you feel about that and what the younger generation is kind of listening to and getting into when they're learning about basketball?
I think that everybody has their job. I think that everybody, is in their spots and in their place for a reason. The media that's happening now is no different from the media back then. They watch, they critique, they talk about it. You watch it because it's entertaining. You want to hear about people talking about your favorite players. You want to hear people talking about the players that everybody hates. This is what it's all about. As players, you can't focus on that. Not as an active player. Once you're retiring and stuff, now you're a fan technically. Unless you're working in the organization, you're a fan. Now you can actually have an opinion and stuff like that. But as a player, why are you giving it energy? Why are you paying attention to it when your focus should be the next game, the next play, the next practice, the next season, what you got to do to improve? And when you get, it's not easy either, because everybody's got these phones now. As soon as you get a phone, you're going to catch a tweet. The banner's going to drop down on your phone and you're going to see it. You can't avoid it. But it's like, what do you really give your energy to? What do you give your time and energy to? Because that's the distraction again. You can't buy into the distractions. You can't buy because it's inevitable. People are going to talk trash. Media's going to give their opinion, whether you're playing good or not. 1 minute they're going to love you. Next minute they're going to hate you. Next minute they're going to love you again. It's just the way life works. But to sit there and focus on what people think and how they care about you when your job is to simply play basketball. You get paid millions to go to the gym for a few hours out of the day. Like, at the end of the day, what are you really upset about? Because somebody said something about what you did. Somebody said something about a shot that you took. Yeah, you take it some kind of way emotionally because this is a craft or something you really live for. And so you kind of got to stand on what your image is now in these days, because a lot of people can run with that and it's a thin line. But at the same time, man, the media they're not going anywhere. And now you got podcasters. They're not going anywhere. You got everybody's going to have an opinion. They're not going anywhere. At the end of the day, do your job. Hoop, man. Give them something to talk about, Hoop.
Thanks, James. We appreciate your time.
Respect,
that was awesome. Good luck.
One last question: LeBron or MJ?
It's always gonna be Michael Jordan for me, man. At the end of the day, though, they're all goats, man. They're all goats. Jordan is a mountain goat, and Bron is like a billy goat, or like one of the little fainting goats. Not that he's not a goat. It's just that Jordan's a different kind of goat, man.
After you said that, Mike's ready to never have you on again. So we appreciate it, James. Thanks for hopping on, and good luck with the coaching search. We'll definitely be following.
No problem, man. I appreciate y'all, and definitely keep doing what you're doing, man. You guys have been growing this, and it's been a pleasure to see you guys from afar. Really appreciate y'all having me on, and keep working, keep going. Good luck with everything.
Thank you, James.
Well, we saw James Gist at Buzz Williams' press conference a couple weeks ago, Mike. And since then, Buzz has been, I don't want to use the corny term, so let's stay away from that.
Buzzing?
He's been active in the transfer portal it was official today, guys. Every single Maryland roster scholarship player on last year's team is gone. So Buzz has 15 open spots, and he's filled 4 of them so far with transfers, picking up new names for the Terps, kind of across different positions. We'll break down all 4, starting with Pharrell Payne. The 3 others are Miles Rice, Solomon Washington, and then just today from Kansas, kind of an interesting commitment, David Coit. Start with Payne, Minnesota transfer to A&M, so played under Williams for a couple seasons after starting in the Big Ten. Really talented kid, is definitely somebody that exploded in the NCAA tournament, scored more than 20 in each game against Yale and Michigan, and is considered to be one of the better bigs of the SEC, which was obviously a great conference. He really thrived in the SEC, playing under Williams, kind of that offensive rebounding attack. And I think that this is a guy who you're looking at as your starting 5-man, averaged around 10 points a game, 5 rebounds, and was consistently a really good offensive rebounder. So, Brendan, probably the best player on Maryland's roster right now as it stands. I don't think you want that, but what do you see in Payne, and how much do you think he could replicate a Julian Reese type senior campaign?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I think it's definitely a positive for Maryland that he has very familiar with Buzz Williams. I would say people are probably overacting a little bit just because of how strong he did in the NCAA tournament, but he's definitely capable of those high, point performances. He's a kind of, obviously he was in the SEC last year, but played in the Big Ten. Previous to that, kind of a pretty classic Big Ten big man. Definitely will give Maryland size and be able to compete physically. And I would assume that he'll be the starter at center or power forward for the Maryland team next year, unless they bring in somebody else to play over him. But overall, very, very solid pickup early on in the transfer portal. And that it was kind of what people expected, the fact that people from Texas A&M or some players were going to follow Buzz Williams. Obviously, he had a lot graduating, which is one of the reasons he wanted to move to Maryland. But this was definitely to be expected once Buzz Williams came to Maryland.
Right. Let's keep it with the A&M transfers. The other one, Solomon Washington, a power forward. This guy is a death piece for sure. Averages around 5 points a game, just over 5 rebounds, but was A&M's best defender, according to Evan Mia. Comes over from A&M, obviously, and is not a shooter, shot only 18% from 3. So I think a guy who you can look to kind of fill the Tafara Gapare, Jordan Geronimo minutes, but definitely a little better than both of them, I would imagine. He's a really nice depth piece. Keeping it there with the depth, today they picked up a backup point guard, David Coit from Kansas. This is a guy who's really interesting, fellas, because he was a really good scorer a couple seasons ago in Northern Illinois, averaged over 20 points a game as a freshman, which is incredible, or as a sophomore, and he averaged 15 as a freshman, which is incredibly impressive for a young player despite being in the MAC, and then transferred to Kansas, where he was really expected to be a starting point guard for a team, guys, that obviously Kansas had a disappointing season, but in the preseason, they were ranked within the top 10, and a lot of places the top 5, and he was going to be the starting point guard. It never really worked out, averaged only 5 points a game, but I think that he's a really nice backup piece. He cannot be the day one starter, I think, if you're Buzz Williams, but he's definitely an upgrade over Jay Young. If you're looking at last year's team, I would imagine kind of fill the same role, probably play a little more. But between those two guys, Mike, is kind of depth pieces. Who do you like better between the two?
I really like Washington. I mean, this isn't somebody who, you said it, you look at the stat sheet, you look at what he averaged last season. He doesn't immediately step out off that stat sheet, but he started in 23 games for them. That was more than paying. And this is someone who, say Buzz Williams doesn't get another forward, brings in a lot of guys who haven't really proven themselves at a Big Ten sort of level. This is a guy that Buzz Williams knows he can start day one. He has someone who he can trust on the defensive end of the court. He's not going to do anything too crazy offensively. You don't really have to worry about him there. He's a defensive presence. He's going to rebound for you. It's someone who Buzz can rely on, and I really like that. And honestly, the majority of his roster building so far, he's gotten guys who, yes, Payne is probably the most impressive. Nobody else really, statistically speaking, is that crazy, but he's gotten guys who have played at major levels, at bigger schools, and he knows guys who he can trust.
All Power 5 guys, which is,
I mean, these are guys he can trust to put in a game. Maybe not play 30 minutes, but he knows he can put these guys in.
Yeah, and definitely been a theme, I think, is kind of fitting guys who know how to play a role, aren't just going to come in and expect 15 shots a game. A guy who does do that, though, is Miles Rice, a guard from Indiana, originally transferred from Washington State. Really, really fascinating story. Brendan overcame cancer, missed almost 2 full seasons before returning to Wazoo, and really thrived, averaged almost 15 points a game to win Pac-12 Freshman of the Year 2 seasons ago. And then he transferred to IU, where he struggled a little bit. Didn't shoot great from the field, averaged only 10 points a game, and was the 6th best player on the Hoosiers last year, according to Mia. But this is a guy who clearly is a scoring guard. I think can play a decent role on Maryland's team as a kind of a combo guard too. That was a nice pickup, and I think overall you can't expect Miles Rice to be your best player again, but if he's just a piece, I think he feels a lot better.
Yeah, I feel like that's exactly how I feel about all the names we've mentioned so far. Very solid players, but can be very solid players on a Power 5 team, but cannot be your number one option. Rice and Coit are very similar in the sense that, well, Rice last year when he transferred was one of the higher prospects, and then went to Indiana, who had a very odd season and kind of a failed leadership. Kansas was not necessarily the same way, but also totally did not meet expectations. The thing with both of these guys is they have pretty high ceilings, but also pretty low floors. And so you don't exactly know what you're going to get out of them heading into the season. Both of them could have extreme breakout years. It kind of actually reminds me of Rodney Rice, who came into Maryland this year expectations weren't super high, and it was kind of the same way. He could absolutely have a breakout season, improve all of his percentages, and be one of the stars, or they could totally take a backseat and regress a little bit. These guys are solid players, but I don't think we're really going to know what Maryland's going to get out of them until the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season.
Yeah, and that's not, I think, the only additions that Maryland's going to make. Mike, still on the hunt for, you would expect at least 6 to 7 more transfers. I mean, they got to fill a roster, so definitely going to be in the double digits. Who are some names Maryland fans can watch out for?
I think the biggest name right now that a lot of Terps fans are buzzing for is Bryce Lindsey out of JMU. So last year he was a redshirt freshman with the Dukes, ended up winning Sun Belt Sixth Man of the Year, Sun Belt Freshman of the Year, averaged 13 points a game, added 2 assists, 2 boards. This is someone who Terps fans and I believe could be starting point guard day one. Now, the question with Lindsey is we talked about those guys having proven experience against top competitors, playing against top competition. Lindsey played in the Sun Belt. Looking through who they played this past season in Wake Forest, that might have been the best team. George Mason, maybe Towson. Like there's not a lot of level like the Big Ten that he's playing. So that's the only main concern for me about Bryce Lindsey. Would you share that concern, Sam?
Yeah, I think that he's a guy that I think along with Rice and Coit and then maybe one other addition, you start to feel way better about your guard room. But I don't know if it's necessarily like an A+ ad, but I think it's an ad that Maryland desperately kind of needs right now as a top scoring guard. And Lindsey has that.
The interesting note about him as well, I mean, he's from Baltimore, so it would be kind of a local Maryland guy. But he played for Buzz Williams 2 years ago, I guess, during that season where he was a redshirt freshman. It was on the Texas A&M team, played 8 games. Like, that is definitely a weirder part of it. You don't often see players transfer out for one coach and then come back to the same coach. But if he were to do that, he obviously has experience with Buzz's system. So that would definitely be a positive for Maryland.
Yeah. Let's look at some other names. They're looking at potentially Makai Mason, a Washington transfer. Joe Tipton reported that Maryland was in contention or in contact, not contention, with Mason. Andre Mills, who kind of like Lindsey, redshirted as a freshman guard at A&M this past season and has 4 years of eligibility. They're looking at kind of an interesting one, Stephen Olanawi, who's from Southern Indiana, but is actually from Australia and averaged around 14 points a game at Southern Indiana. That was on the portal report that Maryland had reached out. And then lastly, Sincere Parker, who played at McNeese State, so Will Wade obviously departing. He's a pretty highly recruited guy, but he averaged over 12 points a game for Will Wade's squad, so would be a nice pickup. And I think that Maryland's going to have to make, I mean, guys, it feels like the number, if we set a line, would be like 5.5, 6.5, and they're going to have to keep adding guys. So it'll be a busy season here upcoming.
I'm really surprised that Buzz Williams wanted to clean house to the extent that he has. I don't know if we want to talk about the coaching staff, but also just like the roster in general. Like Chance Stevens today, he announced he's transferring. Like, even though Buzz does not have any connection with these guys, I would have figured that he at least wants to have some sort of building blocks that, hey, I don't know this player, but he's still a roster piece. Like, I don't have to go out searching for transfer portal edition XXX to fill my 14th roster spot. Like, I'm surprised he didn't keep a lot of these guys around.
It is super interesting, Mike. And honestly, like, Chance Stevens was not going to play a lot on Maryland if he was on the team.
Definitely not, but it's still like a roster piece to have. It's still a player.
I mean, not making contact with Rodney Rice, according to 247's Jeff Ehrman, like, that's interesting.
I'm just thinking, like, for overall culture of, like, going to school at the University of Maryland, I'm not sure how much it matters in 2025 in the state of college basketball. But just, like, general university things, like, you'd think it would be nice to have someone who was on the team last year, who knows the culture, who knows the school, who knows, what it's like to be in the system. And, like, obviously these student athletes, like, how seriously they take classes is obviously one question, but, like, those are other concerns and parts of the equation that people consider when they're choosing a school. And not to have anybody on the roster who went through those experiences, we'll have to see how it plays out. Like, there's definitely a reason Buzz just said, I don't want any of these people I'm starting over. And part of that is maybe he didn't think they're that talented. And the other part is they probably didn't want to be at Maryland if Willard wasn't here. So I think
Yeah.
it's definitely a two-folded thing.
He didn't even keep anyone on the coaching staff, including strength and conditioning coach Kyle Tarp, who he survived every coaching change since Gary Williams. And I mean, that's even more surprising that he didn't keep the strength and conditioning coach.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clear he wants to kind of wipe the Willard era away here and just kind of move fresh.
But he'll only be here for 6 years.
It seems like that might be the case. It'll be interesting to see how the rest of the roster plays out in his staff in the coming weeks. Another team that's been active in the portal is the women's basketball team. We do a little, not even a little bit, definitely some huge ads, more so than the men's team. Two really, really key additions, both from the Big Ten. Brendan, one from Indiana, one from Penn State. Tell me what Brenda Freese's team's been up to.
Yeah, no, they've had a very successful, a bit of a slower start to the transfer portal. Only player to transfer out so far is Emily Fisher, and they have got 2 players in, actually both from the Big Ten. Yarden Garzon from Indiana, who was one of the best three-point shooters in the country and has a chance to be an extremely lethal piece on this team next year. And then Gracie Merkel, who comes from Penn State, who also had an extremely successful season there. Not like necessarily the typical player that Brenda Freese would go after, but I mean, these are both great additions, and I think they both averaged more than 13 points a game for their respective schools, so that could have a chance to have a ton of scoring, which is, for just the first 2 pieces to pick up in the transfer portal is very important.
You mentioned the non-kind of typical ads, and I think that's actually really good for Freeze, especially when you're looking at adding Gracie Merkel. This is a center that Maryland hasn't had that type of player the past 3 or 4 seasons, really since probably Angel Reese was here, was a real true post presence. And Merkel is definitely that. She averaged over 15 points a game, started 26 ones for the Nittany Lions, and scored 24 points against Maryland. Was really Penn State's top scorer. And I think that lacking a true big was definitely apparent this year when Maryland played against players like Lauren Betts. Went up against guys like women like Alexis Markowski at Nebraska. Like, they definitely struggled. And I think that having that element of a post scorer could be really beneficial to Freeze's team and kind of changing their identity, especially, post Shy Sellers. So Merkel and Yardone, I think, will both fit really nicely in the starting lineup. And Mike, when you look at this team next year, just kind of thinking ahead, you have Kayleen Smichael now, Bree McDaniel, Kendall Walker coming off a freshman year. They're probably going to add another point guard to replace Tabiasu. So then one of those, McDaniel, Smichael, Yardone, and Murder, those are all really, really good pieces, I think, to have in a top 5.
Yeah, I'm really excited to watch this Michael McDaniel backcourt, especially next season. I think that's going to be an exciting one for Terps fans to follow, just because of Smichael's scoring ability, McDaniel's energy, everybody's seen it the past 2 seasons now, even her freshman year. So I think it's going to be a really exciting time for Terps fans next season.
We'll keep it updated with women's basketball as they'll sort of make more additions moving forward. Switching over to baseball, guys, and now we kind of start the tumble of sports that are in season. We're recording this on Tuesday, April 8th, and folks, the baseball team has lost again. They fell to Georgetown. Michael House is there and has been there throughout the slide. Tell me a little bit about what's going on with Matt Swope's team.
Yeah, so last week they lost to UMBC on Tuesday. A little bit of a surprise loss for the Terps. They had won 17 straight, I believe. It was at least 15 straight against the Retrievers heading into Swope's first year. They lost to them last year, and then again, they lost to them last Tuesday. Swope said that was a rock bottom for him in his 13 years that he had been on the coaching staff at Maryland. And since then, the Terps have now been on a 5-game losing streak. They got swept the past weekend against Illinois at Illinois. That was the first time they were swept all season. Again, they were shut out. They were run ruled twice. Just not a good weekend for the Terps at all. At this point of the season, I'd say it's just a lack of consistency between the pitching, between the fielding, between the batting. It seems like when one of them is going, the other is off. When the pitching is doing well and you get a really good start from someone other than Kyle McCoy, say you get a good Saturday start, a good Sunday start, and then you got the relief behind them, it seems like that the batting is not there. When the batting is good and they score 10 runs, it seems like the other team is scoring 15. So overall, just looking at the whole scope of the season, there's a lot I could talk about. I could talk about the blown leads, the record that they could have, the series that they could have won, but it's just been an overall lack in consistency from everyone. And it's tough to watch because I genuinely believed heading into the season that they had one of the most talented rosters in the Big Ten. I thought the core of Eddie Akopian, Chris Akopian, Aiden Hill, Hollis Porter, Alex Clarko, Elijah Lambros, Braden Martin, I thought that was a really talented core. They haven't been able to all hit their stride at once. I thought the pitching had a lot of improved depth from the transfer portal from the past summer. Those transfers have disappointed. They have not found the gem from any one of the transfers that they had the past
I mean,
season.
Mike,
Pitching wise.
this has just been the pitching. I mean, yet again, a continued struggle. The second worst ERA in the Big Ten, allowing the second most runs. It just has really, I think, other than Ohio State, I mean, you're looking at easily the worst rotation in the conference, and has pitched a ton of innings as well. So I think that unit has not been good enough. And then just the inconsistency from the hitters. I mean, Matt Swope's MO is being a hitting coach, and they have just not pieced together, I think, with the core that you were looking at. So baseball, obviously, a continued struggle. And I think at this point, Brendan, you got to start to question a little bit what the direction is right now.
Yeah, it's tough, Mike. I want to hear from you because I know there's been some discourse on Twitter as well as some tweets you've put out. What is Matt Swope saying right now to the public? I know he said that he's frustrated about the talent levels not matching the results, but what do you feel like he's saying? What has been your take on his talks to the media?
So recording this on Tuesday, they do have a game on Wednesday. This episode will come out after that game. But after Tuesday's game, after Tuesday's loss to Georgetown, again, another game that they should have won, he took a rather positive approach. Rather than saying it was rock bottom, rather than saying the talent doesn't match the results, he said, now we're focusing on the positives. He mentioned the Washington Nationals 2019 season where they went 19-31 and ended up winning a World Series. Now, he did note baseball only has 56 games. It don't have the same amount of games, but I can see the similarities a little bit. I mean, this is a team who, just like the Nats, they had a lot of talent. They weren't putting it together early. This is more than halfway through the season now. That was like a quarter way through the baseball season. But he took a lot more of a positive note. I'll say that. And regarding your message about tweets and about discourse on Twitter about job security between Matt Swope, between Jimmy Jackson, I mean, I'm going to stand up for the two. Matt Swope, yes, year 2 hasn't gone well, but you got to remember last year he won 30-plus games. That was the most ever by a first-year coach in Maryland history. This year's a disappointment, but Rob Vaughn had a losing record through his first 2 seasons. If the athletic department had the same patience that people are giving Swope right now, there would be no 2022 College Park Regional. They talk about Jimmy Jackson. I mean, Jimmy Jackson took over a pitching staff at JMU that had the conference's worst ERA when he got there. 5 years later, they had the conference's best, and they set the program record for strikeouts. So I think you got to give them both time. I understand Maryland has a culture of winning. They have a history recently of winning, and that's what a lot of fans want. But you have to give more than 2 years. You have to give more than 2 years.
It's interesting right now, the discourse surrounding Swope. But we'll move off of men's baseball and head over to men's and women's lacrosses. The men's team dropping to Rutgers, a really shocking loss. Just kind of disheartening to beat a team that Maryland has beat so many times over the years. And the offense continued to struggle 8-6 after a really phenomenal outing against Penn State. Rutgers, an unranked team, 6-6 on the season to take the number 2 team in the country. Definitely a disappointing a dropping for the men's lacrosse team. Women's lacrosse, definitely a more encouraging outing, but nothing too crazy in terms of the schedule. They beat USC 16-8. USC, a good team. I think they're a little overranked at 19th in the country. Brendan, biggest takeaway from one of the 2 lacrosses. Pick one and kind of give your from this stretch of games here.
My biggest takeaway is that the men's lacrosse team is not going to advance very far in the tournament if they don't have offensive success. I mean, I would say the Rutgers game is probably going to be, well, yeah, thanks for that. Definitely an obvious take, but I thought that the Maryland offense, coming into the season, I thought the defense was going to absolutely carry this team, and they have. But when you look at the Rutgers game, I do think it's going to be a little bit of an anomaly when you look at the entire season. I mean, only scoring 6 goals. It was just the second time the entire season they'd been held under 10. I mean, the recipe for this team had been if they're going to score about 10 goals a game or more. And if they do that, they're going to win. It was just a very sloppy game overall, being played in the rain. And, Rutgers at home scored 5 unanswered goals in the first half. And once that kind of happened and Maryland was on their heels, they've done it a couple times this season, but they're really not a team that's going to come back down 4 goals. The way that Maryland wants to win games is play pretty close, get up early, and then control possession and have good defensive stands and let Logan McNaney do his thing. Didn't have his greatest game. He had 7 saves on 15 shots, a little bit worse than he'd been. The real MVP of that game was the Rutgers goalie. Corinne Stoller had 14 saves on 20 shots. I mean, that's a pretty elite performance. And if you had known that he was going to have that save percentage going in the game, you probably would say every single time Maryland's going to lose, just comparing the 2 goal save percentages. And despite all that, Maryland only lost by 2. Point in the fourth quarter, where Rutgers goalie scored a very long distance goal when McNaney was out of the crease. And at that point, it kind of sealed it for Rutgers. Maryland battled back, but that's when you kind of knew the game was over. Enough on the Rutgers game. They'll get Ohio State next. The path for Maryland winning the Big Ten regular season is very difficult at this point. They play Ohio State and then Johns Hopkins, and then they'll be on to the Big Ten tournament, where they still have a great shot to win it. Ohio State's been really solid. They lost their first game of the season to Utah and have won every game since then. So they're going to be a tough opponent for Maryland on the road. And, a game 2 weeks ago, I would have said they definitely won, but I actually will take Maryland in this game. They bounced back pretty nicely to beat Penn State after their first loss this season to Michigan. So I would expect a similar thing. Women's lacrosse is rolling. They got the offense going, scoring 18 goals in the first game and then 16 was definitely the production they needed after some weaker performances, after the loss to Penn and after the poor performance at Northwestern. So great weekend for women's lacrosse. Men's lacrosse is hoping to rebound coming up soon.
Yeah. Brendan giving a little preview pick to our game of the week there. Mike, we can just kind of wrap it up. Men's lacrosse taking on Ohio State in a huge ranked battle. Probably will go a long way in determining who wins the Big Ten at this point. That game will come up on Saturday at Ohio State, as Brendan mentioned. Who do you have?
I'm going to take the Terps. I can't see them losing their 3rd game of the season, let alone back-to-back games. I feel like this roster is too talented to let that happen.
Yeah. I'm actually going to go with Ohio State. I think the skid continues. I have a little concerns about Maryland's offensive versatility, so I'll take the Buckeyes in our game of the week. Moving off to the last sport of the spring, softball. What a dismal performance against Indiana. They got swept, but the main story from this weekend was Indiana put up 15 runs in 1 inning, which is the 3rd most of an NCAA team over the past 3 seasons, according to the Diamondbacks' Faith Harris. Fascinating stuff.
That's good, right? 15 runs is very good.
For Indiana, definitely.
For Indiana, it's very good for Indiana. It's not bad for Maryland. Hey, if you told me Maryland was going to score 10 runs in a game and lose, I would have looked at you like you were crazy. So
I think at that point, what do you even say if you're Lauren Carn? Team comes back in the dugout, you just all right, let's get the bats going. What are you even saying at that moment?
I have no idea. I mean, Maryland was winning at that point in the game.
Yeah, well, not anymore.
It was. I mean, they had 8 runs, and then you let up 15. I'm not even sure. Yeah, that's just
something the baseball team would do.
Yeah, something that would happen to the baseball team. That wraps up our sports recaps. Brendan, take us away with Terrific Terp.
All right, got a nice long one here for you guys at home. Finish off your episode here. This week's Terrific Terp is a champion for women's athletics around the country and also specifically at the University of Maryland. Dorothy McKnight, who went by Dottie, grew up in Pennsylvania in the 1940s. Then she stayed in State for college, where she attended Uranus College for undergrad and Temple University for grad school. She chose her college because she was surrounded by sports growing up in her family in her hometown of Prospect Park, Pennsylvania, and by going to Ursinus, She was able to compete in sports while also getting her degree in physical education, which would then allow her to teach and coach in the sporting world. Dottie got her start in coaching back in high school at Interborough High School. She coached field hockey, basketball, and softball. After that, she made a trip to Michigan State University, where she coached field hockey and lacrosse. Finally, in 1964, she made her way to Maryland, where she was an assistant professor of physical education, as well as a coach for the women's field hockey, lacrosse, and basketball team. She helped oversee all the women's sports at Maryland, and when she arrived, there were no formal teams set up. She described them more as interest groups, but no official teams. She took the initiative and started coaching and setting a schedule with other schools. Before Title IX, it was difficult to get assistance from the University of Maryland. Dottie said it was a battle to get even a state car to help take players to the game. While at Maryland, she led the Terps to their first state championship in 1973 in women's basketball, and was also the coach at Maryland during the first ever televised women's basketball game for the entire United States, which was held in 1975. Maryland lost that one 80-48 to Immaculate. After that, she worked at Athletic and Sports Consultants, Inc. as the president and owner. Then in 1996, she became the executive director of the Women's Lacrosse Association. Dottie can still be seen around the Terps athletic scene. In fact, she attended the Sweet 16 send-off for the women's basketball team just a few weeks ago. All her progress in women's sports at Maryland and around the country makes Dottie this week's Terrific Terp.
What a wrap up from Brendan. Another good episode here with James. Appreciate him hopping on. Appreciate you listening. You can find all of us at Spotify, Apple, Twitter, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Keep following along. We really appreciate the listenership on last week's episode, and we'll continue to produce great content for you. So from Under the Shell, have a good night.
Guess what? You've got Under the Shell Podcast. Nobody does it better.